Alright, boys and girls, it's that time of the day again. We watched Rebel Moon Part 1, Child of Fire, and whatever. Who gives a shit? This isn't the Snyder Cut release, which we'll probably also review later.
Yeah.
Maybe. I got access to my ex-girlfriend's Netflix account just to watch Rebel Moon because the release was weird, and we wanted to get our end of the year list written, which is coming soon. So yeah, Aiden, what is the plot of Zack Snyder's newest magnum opus, part 1 of his magnum opus, new magnum opus, Rebel Moon, Child of Fire, Part 1, Child of Fire, or whatever.
Rebel Moon is a Star Wars clone, and also Seven Samurai, and also Dune, all in one convenient package. Part 1 is a third of a movie. It is all of the setup. So there's a sand farmer played by Sophia Boutella, better known as the Mummy from The Mummy.
One of 2017's hot stars with Cara Danger and Dane DeHaan, who all got left in 2017 where they belong, but she's back.
Yep. And she is a sand farmer, and she says, "That's what I do. I rebel." And then she rebels against the evil government, who are Nazi people who wear space uniforms. And she meets a samurai Asian woman who has 2 lightsabers, but even though she's good, she uses red lightsabers to make them legally distinct.
The bad guy's got a blue lightsaber.
There's a robot he's like a nice robot, and he's a pacifist, and he gets really sad when he has to kill a Nazi because he's a pacifist, or she, I don't know. It's a robot. And the Asian woman with the lightsabers kills a giant spider that kidnapped a kid. And this whole movie is just setting up every character that's going to appear in the later movies. And it's just the first third of a movie, so it's all the exposition and setup and all the characters coming together. And like the Empire's invaded their planet, and they say we need to become the 7 samurai, and they get like 5 of the 7 in this movie.
I think there's 6 at the end.
6 of the 7, something like that. And then at the end, they like fight like 8 Nazis, and Sophia Boutella fights the baddest Nazi on like a little platform thing. And they're like, wow, that was cool, but now we have to do that again in 6 months in the second movie. Sorry. Goodbye. That's pretty much the movie. I mean, it's got a lot of Zack Snyderisms in there mixed in, but
Oiled up, ripped men.
if you took the first third of 7 Samurai and stretched it to 2.5 hours and then set it in Star Wars, it's this movie. That's what happens. So Connor, what'd you think of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Woman of Fire, Lady, the Hunger Games subtitle, whatever.
Yeah, it's relatively better than most Zack Snyder movies. Not as good as like Man of Steel or Dawn of the Dead, but it's a step above. It's about on par with like Watchmen, where it's like, okay, this is just a thing that exists. Zack Snyder, it works best when he has direct source material. And I mean, this is inspired by 7 Samurai, but it's the second 7 Samurai clone, that's also a ripoff of Star Wars, because you got, of course, Battle Beyond the Stars from the late 70s from Roger Corman, or early 80s. And this one, okay, so there's some stuff. Most of the movie is incredibly dull since it is set up. And, you know, maybe the sequels will be better. But my problem is, this movie, above even Spider-Verse and Fast and Furious X, 100% feels like nothing but setup.
Yeah.
Like, there's like a tease fight at the end, but then we know that the villain who lost the battle is gonna come back stronger in the next one because he gets put in like a water pod or something, and he's like, now I'm getting cloned or revived or whatever. He's put in a box or tank. Yeah, I don't know, but
he's still alive because he's in the tank, and the guys come and look at him, and he looks at them, and he's like, I'm going to turn myself stronger or something.
I will say the C-3PO ripoff character looks pretty decent. There's actually a lot of decent like designs. Like Zack Snyder pulled a lot of really cool looking concept art for this movie. The movie is shot in the traditional Zack Snyder way. Traditional posts Man of Steel and pre-Man of Steel. There's a couple movies he doesn't do this style, but like most of his movies are this style. I can't remember the cinematographer's name. But the cinematographer that worked on like BVS and stuff, I'm sure is the guy he hired.
This movie reminded me a lot of fucking Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch because it was lots of slow-mo.
Lots of slow-mo.
Lots of
fairly ugly. Lots of CGI.
Slow-mo.
But this movie at least bothered to have cool, had some cool design choices, I guess, but it's just set to kind of an ugly movie. My other problem is, I don't mind if you are inspired by Seven Samurai to do like the small group of warriors come together and have to fight the big evil regime. That's fine. Lots of people have taken that from Seven Samurai. But you're also taking from Star Wars at the same time, which you would think, if you're making a trilogy inspired by Star Wars, why not do the Star Wars trilogy thing? The Star Wars trilogy acts as one continual story, but especially the first movie. Empire and Return of the Jedi, Empire kind of ends on that cliffhanger because they knew Return of the Jedi was happening. But the opening part stood on its own very well, Star Wars.
Yeah.
And even Return of the Jedi and Empire work on their own. They should have made a movie that stood on its own, take that inspiration from Star Wars, and took like a general idea of Seven Samurai. Maybe the villains are underprepared because they underestimate the Seven. They fight them and they get a momentary win, a la Star Wars. And then they come back stronger and gain a victory, a la Empire. And then we have to see the Seven people come back together one last time to ultimately end the tyranny of the Empire, a la Return of the Jedi. That's how I would have structured it if I was Zach. I mean, there's like bones here of like a decent movie. It's definitely edgy Star Wars. And it's not as bad as most Zack Snyder movies. I just don't have much of an opinion formed based on part one, because my theory is Zack Snyder's best movies are boring ones where it's all set up, like Man of Steel. And his worst movies are when the concepts start coming in. So even though I was pretty neutral on this movie, I have a feeling it's more than likely going to start getting really stupid as we start seeing chapter 2 and 3. This, as it stands, is a pretty meh movie that I was bored watching, and sets up a bunch of shit that I'm not super interested in because the movie doesn't really matter. Zack Snyder really liked chiseled six-packs that were greased up in baby oil, which I thought was strange. He greases up Digimon. Yeah, and it allowed me to make some funny jokes. Or jokes that I thought were funny. Where I was like, hey Digimon, come over here. We just need to make this shot look better. And then Zack Snyder walks over there with baby oil and starts rubbing his abs.
And then the Dragon Rider guy, the guy who rides the fucking bird horse. Fabio rides the hippogriff from Harry Potter.
Yeah, and Fabio, we see him, he's like a BDSM sex slave for this weird old disgusting guy.
Yeah.
And he's like working in the field or something. And he's chiseled and greased up with baby oil. it's a little strange for sure. Brings to mind like 300, but like Zack Snyder really likes oiled up bodybuilders. He's also kind of got a Han Solo character slotted in, and that character looks a lot like Zack Snyder, but 15 years younger and with the chiseled six pack that he covers in baby oil. And he's kind of like the Han Solo, which I thought was funny because I always like seeing self inserts. Like Zack Snyder couldn't have looked at that guy and said, "This guy looks like me, but 15 years younger and with a chiseled six pack. Let me put some baby oil on it." Like, you know, that's what he fucking said. Then he said, if I was in the movie, I'd be like the cool Han Solo type. So he dresses this motherfucker up like Han Solo, puts some baby oil on his abs and whatever. It's fucking weird, kind of. But, you know, I'm happy Zack Snyder is not making shitty DC movies, and he's trying to take he's wearing his inspirations on his sleeve for sure, but it's his own playground. And I think part of what makes the DCEU movies so intolerable for me is that it's some guy who just doesn't really understand the DC characters beyond their chiseled six packs that they can oil up, and that's it. So it's nice to see Zack do his own thing. He can fuck around and do these Rebel Moon movies, and since it's Zack Snyder making a Star Wars clone, that's a good enough hook for me to watch it and probably hate the next two movies a lot more than I hated this movie, which I have virtually no thoughts beyond the fact that I think it's funny that Zack Snyder oiled a bunch of dudes' six packs. No disrespect to Zack Snyder. I don't think he's a gay man, so I'm not disrespecting gay people for it. I just think it's weird that he has a thing for like oiling up six packs. It's just kind of bizarre to me. Anyhow, that was Zack Snyder, my opinion on Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. Aiden, what did you think of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon?
I don't know. It looked okay most of the time. Sometimes, not always, but the designs were interesting. The action was good enough. There's a ridiculous amount of slow-mo and like all the Zack Snyderisms with the washed out colors and the bloom and the grays. But there was some occasional nice shooting. It's a third of the movie, just set to introduce the characters.
And introduce the environment of Tatooine.
Yeah. And I didn't end up really caring about any of the characters. Like the samurai lady with the two lightsabers is cool because she has two lightsabers. I think the mummy girl is kind of like a very boring, neutral protagonist. And like Fabio is funny. And Digimon is... he's there, he doesn't really do much in this one. It's just not satisfying, really, because it's a fucking 2.5 hour movie, and you get to the end and there's like a short little war battle scene that's just all bad slow-mo, and then like 5 people hit each other on top of like a space skyscraper thing. And then the bad guy gets away like fucking Dr. Claw in Mission in fucking Inspector Gadget. He's like, "I'll get you next time, Gadget," and fucking go Gadget. Fucking help Penny with her homework.
Yeah, Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe is not...
And then it's kind of like, yeah, it all just feels like a third of a movie. Like, you don't get to any payoff in this movie. They try. They have a little action scene as like an apology for the 2 hours of setup, but it just feels kind of pointless to watch until the second one's out, because you're just setting yourself up to be like, oh, okay, and then you have to wait. It's like Harry Potter 7, which I watched recently, where part 1 is just like the first act of the movie, and it's just boring setup and people crying in the woods, but in this case they're in the desert. And then part 2 will presumably just be fucking action schlock, which I also don't want to watch, but I would have liked a little payoff in this one of some kind.
Zack Snyder might be a genius, actually, now that I think about it, because what Zack Snyder realized is he'll make a really boring movie that all of his fans will watch and be like, it's really good because it's boring, which means it must be good. He must have had something to say. I don't know, because I'm too brain dead to actually think. But then, in part 2, it's all action, and the Snyder fans are happy because it's all action.
Yeah. Get you a man who can do both, I guess.
Yeah.
Boring, nothing exposition movies and mindless schlock action. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'll probably we'll probably end up watching the extended version of this, and then watching the second movie, and I'll probably have more of an opinion on this movie once I see that it pays off to something. I don't know if it'll be better or worse once things are actually paid off, but I'll certainly feel less apathetic to everything going on one way or the other. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say. It's a third of a movie. It'd be like, when it bait and switched everyone, when it just like ends on a fucking arbitrary cliffhanger.
Yeah. Well, it looks like Rebel Moon Part 2 is done, and it comes out in April 2024. April 19th.
Sure. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty much just withholding judgment until we see the second part of this movie.
I think April 14th, 2024, we're going to get a much clearer picture if Rebel Moon is Zack Snyder's first foray into making a good movie, or if we're in for a 3-part piece of shit.
I mean, this part's
multiple director's cuts for each part.
This part's
probably a long 10-hour miniseries version.
This is definitely too long of a third of a movie. I will say that. Anyway, Connor, would you recommend Rebel Moon Part 1, The Lady of Fire? Woman, Fire, something Fire.
I would withhold watching it. If you're a Zack Snyder fan, you've already watched it by the time this video's out. But if you're casually scrolling Netflix trying to find something to watch, I would withhold the judgment until the second part comes out, at least. But I think for now, I'm probably just going to withhold judgment until part 2 and 3 come out. At least this isn't like some of the 2-part movies where they're releasing each part extremely, you gotta wait a year and a half, and now all of a sudden I have to watch Fast X Part 1 to remember what happened. This is like, okay, every 4 months they're gonna piecemeal us essentially a 10-hour miniseries by Zack Snyder. They jazz up and say it's a 3-part movie. It's 1/3 of a miniseries essentially, and it's the setup. So no, for now I guess no. But it's more of a tentative no. Just wait and see. We'll give our opinions on part 2 and 3 at a later date. So Aiden, would you recommend Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon?
No. It's a third of a movie. I can't imagine, even if you like this first third of the movie, I can't imagine getting to the end of it and being like, oh man, I'm excited for fucking 5 months from now when the second part comes out and I get to rewatch it. You might as well just wait until it's fucking finished. I don't know. It's not done. It's just not done.
No, it's but it is a genius strategy because you have the first part, then you got the director's cut, and everyone's gonna rewatch the director's cut, and then you got the second part, and then to understand the second part, you got to remember what happened in the first part. So you go back to the director's cut of the first part. All of a sudden, you're at 3 viewings of Rebel Moon, and who knows if it's even good. And then the same cycle with the second part, but this time you gotta watch 1 and 2 to understand what happens in part 3.
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is milk 20 viewings of Rebel Moon, which is kind of a genius strategy on Netflix's part.
Well, anyway. Bye.
Yep.